The rise and legacy of ancient Rome. Standing on the Palatine Hill today, among the weathered ruins of empire, it's almost impossible to imagine that Rome began as nothing more than a cluster of mud huts beside a malarial swamp. Yet from these humble beginnings arose the most extraordinary civilization in human history. A realm that would stretch from the foggy shores of Britain to the sun-baked sands of Egypt, from the Atlantic coast to the Euphrates River. This is not just a story of conquest and collapse, though there is plenty of both. It is the tale of how a tiny settlement of outcasts and fugitives created lasting ideas about law, citizenship, and power that still shape our world today. For more than 1,000 years, all roads truly led to Rome. What force of destiny or quirk of fate allowed one city to dominate the ancient world so completely that a man could walk from York to Jerusalem protected by the same laws, spending the same coins, and reading the same books? The answer lies in an epic saga of brutal dictators and brilliant reformers, of accidental heroes and calculating villains, of engineers who spanned rivers and generals who bridged cultures. This is their story, a narrative that begins with a wolf nursling 2 abandoned infants and ends with the fall of an empire, but truly never ends at all. The birth and evolution of Rome, myth and reality. The she-wolf found them at dawn. 2 infants, barely a few days old, lay abandoned in a crude basket along the Tiber's flood-swollen banks. According to legend, these were no ordinary children. They were the twin sons of a Vestal Virgin and Mars himself, the god of war. Their great-uncle, the usurper King Aurelius, had ordered their death, fearing any threat to his stolen throne. But fate, or perhaps the gods, had other plans. Recent archaeological discoveries on the Palatine Hill have uncovered traces of an 8th century BCE settlement exactly where the Romans claimed Romulus would later build his city. The remnants tell a different but equally fascinating story of hardy Latin farmers and ambitious traders who chose this strategic location overlooking a natural river crossing. They built their homes from timber and clay, following the contours of the hill's natural plateau. Each generation's construction was built upon the ruins of the last, slowly raising the settlement higher above the floodplain. The true founding of Rome likely involved neither divine intervention nor heroic twins, but rather the gradual merging of several hilltop villages into a single community. Yet the Romans' chosen foundation myth reveals something profound about how they saw themselves. The story of Romulus and Remus, abandoned by men, saved by a wolf, raised by shepherds, and destined for greatness, embodied core Roman values: survival against odds, the favor of the gods, and the belief that greatness could emerge from the humblest origins. By the 6th century BCE, this once modest settlement had already begun to transform itself. Excavations beneath the Roman Forum have revealed sophisticated engineering works from this period, massive stone platforms and drainage systems that turned a swampy lowland into what would become the heart of the ancient world's greatest city. The Romans were already displaying their signature pragmatism, bending nature itself to serve their ambitions. But it was in the realm of social engineering that early Rome truly excelled. The Romans' genius lay in their ability to turn enemies into citizens and outsiders into stakeholders. When Romulus needed to populate his new city, the legend tells us he declared it an asylum for fugitives, escaped slaves, and exiles. Modern historians once dismissed this as pure mythology, but archaeological evidence has revealed that early Rome was indeed extraordinarily diverse for its time, with material culture showing influences from Latin, Sabine, and Etruscan traditions all mingling together. This multicultural foundation would prove crucial to Rome's future success. While Greek cities proudly traced their ancestry to a single heroic founder and jealously guarded their citizenship, Rome, from its very beginning, was a city of immigrants and outsiders who had banded together to create something new. This openness to incorporation and adaptation would become Rome's greatest strength, allowing it to grow from a collection of hilltop huts into an empire that encompassed much of the known world. The wolf who saved the twins became Rome's most enduring symbol, captured in bronze sometime in the 5th century BCE. The Capitoline wolf statue, with its lean predatory grace and nurturing pose, perfectly encapsulates the paradox of Roman power, the ability to combine ruthless strength with protective integration. The twins she saved may be legend, but the civilization they represent would reshape the world in ways that echo down to the present day. The rise and fall of Rome's 7 kings. The year was 616 BCE, and a young nobleman from the Etruscan city of Tarquini was about to change Rome forever. Lucumo, who would later take the name Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, was riding toward Rome in a covered chariot with his ambitious wife Tanaquil when an eagle swooped down from the sky. The massive bird hovered over their carriage, snatched Lucumo's cap with its talons, circled overhead, then descended to replace it perfectly on his head. Tanaquil, skilled in Etruscan augury, immediately grasped the significance. Her husband was destined for kingship. Tarquinius Priscus would prove to be Rome's great builder king, transforming the city from a collection of tribal settlements into an urban center that rivaled wealthy Etruscan metropolises to the north. Under his reign, the valleys between Rome's hills were drained and paved, creating the Forum Romanum. The king ordered the construction of stone seating around the valley that would become the Circus Maximus, transforming informal horse races into Rome's most spectacular public games. But his most ambitious project was the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, a structure so massive that its foundations required reshaping the hilltop itself. His successor, Servius Tullius, who rose from slave to king, proved to be Rome's great organizer. Born Mastarna in an Etruscan city, he created Rome's first census, dividing citizens into classes based on wealth rather than birth. This revolutionary system would serve as the foundation for both the Roman army and political organization for centuries to come. His military reforms transformed Rome's army from a collection of clan-based warriors into a disciplined fighting force organized by wealth and equipment. The poorest citizens, unable to afford proper arms, were assigned to centuries of engineers and musicians, a pragmatic solution that gave every Roman a role in defense of the city. But it was the last king, Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, who would inadvertently give birth to the Roman Republic through his own tyranny. Unlike his predecessors who had ruled through consensus with the Senate, Superbus murdered opponents, abolished ancient rights, and forced citizens into labor gangs to complete his massive construction projects. The breaking point came when his son Sextus raped Lucretia, the wife of a noble Roman. Her suicide, after extracting oaths of vengeance from her husband and kinsmen, sparked a revolution that would transform Rome into something unprecedented in the ancient world. The kings had given Rome its fundamental institutions: the Senate, the army, the public priesthoods, and the basic structures of government. They had transformed Rome physically with monuments, roads, and sewers that would last a millennium. But their greatest gift to Rome came through their overthrow, teaching Romans to hate the very idea of monarchy. This hatred of kings would become a core part of Roman identity, shaping their politics and society in ways that would reverberate through history. The actual end came swiftly. While Tarquinius Superbus was away besieging the city of Ardea, a group of nobles led by Lucius Junius Brutus seized control of Rome. They swore a public oath that never again would any man rule Rome as king. Superbus rushed back to find the gates barred against him. His attempts to retake the city, first through negotiation, then through force, failed. The age of Roman kings was over. But from their legacy would rise something far more powerful: the Roman Republic. The birth of the Roman Republic, liberty and law. The morning after the Revolution, Rome awoke to silence. The king's palace stood empty. The royal guards had vanished. In their place, two men, Lucius Junius Brutus and Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus, appeared in the forum wearing simple white togas, each preceded by 12 lictors carrying fasces, the bound rods that symbolized authority. These were Rome's first consuls, elected leaders who would share power equally and serve for just 1 year. It was an experiment in government unlike anything the ancient world had seen. The Roman Republic was born in a spirit of radical innovation, masked as conservative restoration. While claiming to defend traditional rights against royal tyranny, the revolutionaries created entirely new institutions. They divided the king's sacred and civil powers among multiple officials: consuls for civil authority, a rex sacrorum for religious rights, and praetors for justice. No single person could again accumulate the total power of kingship. Even more remarkably, they introduced the concept of provocatio, the right of a citizen to appeal a magistrate's decision to the assembly of the people. But the new system faced its first crisis almost immediately. Brutus discovered that his own sons were plotting to restore the monarchy. In a moment that would be celebrated for centuries as the epitome of republican virtue, he ordered their execution and watched from his consul's seat as they were flogged and beheaded. The message was clear: the law stood above blood ties, and no one, not even a consul's children, was above it. The early republic's greatest innovation was its solution to crisis management. When faced with emergency, rather than suspend their constitution like modern states, the Romans would temporarily restore unity of command through the office of dictator, but with strict limits. A dictator's power lasted just 6 months, and he had to be nominated by a consul and confirmed by the Senate. The first to hold this office was Titus Lartius, appointed to face a Latin invasion in 501 BCE. He organized Rome's defenses, negotiated with the enemy, and then, in an act that would seem remarkable to later ages, voluntarily resigned his power before his term was complete. These early years also saw the creation of Rome's unique system of checks and balances. The power of veto, literally I forbid, allowed any magistrate to block the actions of another of equal or lesser rank. The tribunes of the plebs, established to protect commoner rights, could veto even the actions of consuls. This created a system where cooperation and consensus were necessary for government to function. The Romans had discovered that political gridlock, managed carefully, could be a tool for stability rather than paralysis. Yet perhaps the most profound change came in how Romans viewed themselves. Citizenship was no longer just a matter of birth or residence. It became a legal status with defined rights and duties. A Roman citizen could not be tortured, executed without trial, or subjected to corporal punishment without right of appeal. These rights were not granted by any ruler, but were inherent in citizenship itself. When a magistrate approached a gathering of citizens, his lictors would lower their fasces, symbolically acknowledging that ultimate sovereignty resided in the citizen body. The Republic would face greater challenges in the centuries to come, but these early institutions proved remarkably durable. The Romans had created something unprecedented, a republic of laws rather than men, where power was shared and limited, and where citizenship carried both privileges and responsibilities. It was an achievement that would influence political thought for the next 2,000 years. Rome's rise, from city-state to dominant power. Dawn broke over the Alban hills in 396 BCE as Marcus Furius Camillus gazed at the seemingly impregnable walls of Veii. For 9 years, Rome had besieged this wealthy Etruscan city, and for 9 years they had failed. But Camillus had a plan unprecedented in warfare. His men were digging beneath the strongest point of Veii's defenses, guided by the sound of voices from the city's main temple above. As the Veian king made a sacrifice at the altar, Roman soldiers burst through the floor. The fall of Veii would double Rome's territory and mark the beginning of its transformation from city-state to empire. The century that followed brought Rome face to face with the most fearsome warriors of the age. The Gauls swept down from the north in 390 BCE, their long swords and towering physical presence striking terror into armies that faced them. At the river Allia, they shattered the Roman army in a battle so catastrophic that the date, July 18th, was marked as unlucky in all future Roman calendars. The Gauls sacked Rome but found only empty streets. The population had evacuated except for elderly senators who sat motionless in their carved chairs in the forum, so still and dignified that the Gauls initially thought they were statues of gods. From this nadir emerged Rome's greatest military innovation, the manipular legion. Breaking with the traditional Greek phalanx, Roman commanders divided their army into small, flexible units that could fight independently. Young soldiers armed with throwing spears formed the first line, backed by the more experienced men wielding the deadly gladius hispanicus, the Spanish sword that would become Rome's signature weapon. When the Gauls returned in 367 BCE, they faced an army that could match their mobility and exceed their discipline. The Samnite Wars introduced Rome to mountain warfare and forced another revolution in tactics. Fighting in the Apennines against masters of ambush warfare, Rome learned to fortify every camp, maintain constant scouting, and develop the pilum, a heavy javelin designed to pierce shields and bend on impact, leaving enemies defenseless. The humiliation of the Caudine Forks, where an entire Roman army was forced to surrender and pass under the yoke, sparked a transformation in Roman military engineering. They began building the first of their famous military roads, starting with the Via Appia in 312 BCE, allowing rapid deployment of forces anywhere in their growing territory. Yet Rome's most powerful weapon was not steel but citizenship. After defeating the Latin League in 338 BCE, Rome did something unprecedented. Rather than subjugate their former enemies, they offered them citizenship. Cities close to Rome became full citizens, while more distant allies received limited citizenship rights that could become full membership over time. This created a network of communities bound to Rome by ties of mutual interest rather than just force. When Pyrrhus of Epirus arrived in 280 BCE to support the Greek cities of southern Italy, he found not a conquering empire, but a federation of willing allies. Pyrrhus won his battles, but at such cost that he reportedly said, Another such victory and I am undone, giving us the term Pyrrhic victory. He had encountered Rome's greatest strength, its seemingly inexhaustible capacity to absorb losses and field new armies. This resilience came not from superior numbers, but from superior organization. Rome's system of military colonies, each a miniature Rome populated by veteran soldiers and their families, created an interconnected network of fortified cities loyal to Roman interests. By 265 BCE, Rome dominated Italy from the Arno River to the Straits of Messina. They had created something new in history, a state that expanded through incorporation rather than just conquest, offering paths to citizenship for former enemies and turning subjects into stakeholders. This system would soon be tested against an empire of a very different kind, as Rome's gaze turned to the wealthy island of Sicily and its powerful defender, Carthage. The Punic Wars, Hannibal, Rome, and the birth of an empire. In the winter of 219 BCE, a young Carthaginian commander stood at the foot of the Pyrenees Mountains, preparing for what seemed impossible. Hannibal Barca, just 29 years old, was about to launch the most audacious military campaign in ancient history. His plan: march 50,000 men, 37 elephants, and thousands of horses from Spain through unmarked alpine passes and into the heart of Italy itself. As he gave the order to advance, few realized that this moment would transform the Mediterranean world forever. The roots of this conflict lay in the clash of empires 2 generations earlier. Rome's first attempt to build a navy had been almost comical. Sailors trained on wooden frames built on beaches, rowing in the sand because they couldn't swim. Yet within 2 months, they had reverse-engineered a stranded Carthaginian warship and built 100 copies. Their secret weapon was the corvus, a boarding bridge with a spike that would pin enemy ships in place, turning naval battles into infantry engagements where Roman soldiers excelled. But it was Hannibal who would elevate war to an art form. After crossing the Alps, losing half his army to cold, starvation, and mountain tribes, he demonstrated a psychological mastery of warfare that would be studied for millennia. At Lake Trasimene, he created history's first documented large-scale ambush, hiding thousands of troops in morning fog along a narrow road. The Roman army walked into a trap so perfect that many soldiers drowned trying to swim away in full armor, their general killed by a Gallic spear without ever seeing his attacker. The Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE showcased tactical brilliance on a scale that wouldn't be seen again for centuries. Hannibal placed his weakest troops in the center, ordering them to gradually give ground when attacked. As the Roman army pressed forward, his African heavy infantry wheeled inward from the flanks, creating history's first documented double envelopment. 70,000 Romans died in a single day, still the deadliest battle in Western military history. Yet Rome's response to catastrophe revealed something extraordinary about their society. When Hannibal offered to negotiate after Cannae, the Senate refused to even receive his ambassadors. They melted down temple treasures to pay for new armies, armed slaves with promises of freedom, and lowered the military age to 17. Women donated their jewelry to the war effort, and a new phrase entered the Latin language: Hannibal ad portas, Hannibal at the gates, the ultimate expression of crisis. The war's turning point came through Publius Cornelius Scipio, who proposed a strategy so bold that the elderly senators initially thought him mad. While Hannibal ravaged Italy, Scipio sailed for Spain with a small army, captured New Carthage in a single day by exploiting low tide to wade through a lagoon, and systematically dismantled Carthage's empire. He studied Hannibal's tactics and improved upon them, adding innovations like the coordinated use of cavalry and infantry in hammer and anvil attacks. The final battle at Zama in 202 BCE showcased how much Rome had learned. Scipio neutralized Hannibal's elephants by creating lanes in his formation, turning the beasts back on Carthaginian lines. His cavalry commander Massinissa, a Numidian prince who had switched sides after being impressed by Roman honor, led the decisive charge that won both the battle and the war. Rome had learned to beat Hannibal by copying him. 50 years later, Rome would destroy Carthage completely, plowing salt into the soil in a ritual of annihilation. But the real destruction was more subtle. They had absorbed all of Carthage's trading networks, technical knowledge, and military innovations. The student had not just defeated, but fully supplanted the teacher. Rome was now the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean, but more importantly, they had learned how to run an empire. The price of empire: Rome's transformation and turmoil. In 168 BCE, a curious crowd gathered in Rome's Forum to watch something unprecedented, a performance of Euripides' tragedy Andromache in the original Greek. Among the spectators sat Aemilius Paulus, fresh from his conquest of Macedonia, tears streaming down his face as he watched actors wearing the actual golden masks and royal robes of the kingdom he had just destroyed. The Roman aristocracy's children sat beside him, already more fluent in Greek than Latin, embodying a cultural revolution that would transform Rome more profoundly than any military conquest. The treasures flooding into Rome transformed the city overnight. Generals who had grown up in simple brick houses now built marble palaces adorned with looted Greek statuary. The Forum filled with Persian tapestries and Corinthian bronze, while exotic spices from the East made traditional Roman cuisine seem bland by comparison. A new class of super-wealthy Romans emerged, the negotiators, who made fortunes financing trade across the Mediterranean. One such man, Marcus Crassus, would eventually amass a fortune equal to the Roman state's annual budget, largely through sophisticated real estate speculation. But beneath this glittering surface, the foundations of Roman society were cracking. Small farmers, once the backbone of both the army and the economy, returned from years of military service to find their farms in ruins and their markets flooded with cheap grain from Sicily and Africa. Many sold their ancestral lands to wealthy senators who combined thousands of small plots into vast estates, latifundia, worked by armies of slaves captured in foreign wars. A countryside that had once supported millions of free peasant farmers became a landscape of vast slave plantations, producing wine and olive oil for export. The first person to recognize the existential danger in this transformation was Tiberius Gracchus. Born to the highest nobility, his father had been censor, his mother was Scipio Africanus's daughter. Tiberius shocked his own class by proposing to enforce long-ignored laws limiting the size of public land holdings. His real innovation was bypassing the Senate entirely and taking his law directly to the plebeian assembly. It passed, but the precedent of going around Rome's traditional power structure would have fatal consequences. The crisis came to a head in the summer of 133 BCE. As Tiberius sought a second term as tribune, technically illegal but arguably necessary to protect his reforms, a group of senators led by his own cousin wrapped their togas around their left arms as makeshift shields, grabbed wooden clubs, and marched up the Capitoline Hill. The first political murder in Rome for centuries left Tiberius and 300 supporters dead, their bodies thrown into the Tiber. Political violence, once unleashed, would prove impossible to contain. 10 years later, Tiberius's younger brother Gaius pushed even more radical reforms. He established Rome's first system of state-subsidized grain distribution, founded colonies to resettle displaced farmers, and, most radically, proposed extending citizenship to Rome's Italian allies. But he also created the first state-run courts to try corrupt governors, directly challenging senatorial privilege. His death, chased down by armed opponents, marked the point of no return for the Republic. The Gracchi brothers' deaths transformed Roman politics. The old consensus that political disputes must be resolved through debate and compromise was broken forever. Future reformers would come armed with private bodyguards, while conservatives increasingly relied on emergency decrees to override constitutional protections. A system designed to prevent any individual from accumulating too much power now incentivized exactly that. Only the powerful could hope to survive in politics. Yet the Gracchi had permanently changed how Romans thought about government. Their belief that the state had a duty to care for its poorest citizens, their use of popular assemblies to bypass gridlock, and their vision of an expanded citizenship would influence Roman politics for centuries to come. They had discovered the power of populist politics in a republic and demonstrated both its potential and its perils. The fall of the Roman Republic, great men and civil wars. The day Gaius Marius revolutionized warfare began with a recruiting speech in Rome's Forum. Breaking with centuries of tradition, he looked past the property-owning classes and pointed directly at the urban poor. "The poor will fight better," he declared, "having nothing to lose." With those words, he transformed Rome's citizen militia into a professional army of career soldiers who looked to their generals, not the Senate, for land and loot. It was 107 BCE, and the Republic had just taken its first step toward its own destruction. Marius's new legions proved devastatingly effective. When Germanic tribes threatened to overrun Italy, his troops massacred them in battles at Aquae Sextiae and Vercellae. His secret weapon was the Marian mule, each soldier carrying his own equipment, food and tools, allowing unprecedented mobility. The sight of legionaries building a fortified camp each night, working with the precision of master engineers, would become legendary. But these soldiers' primary loyalty was to the man who promised them land after service, not to distant senators who had never shared their hardships. The next generation brought Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who added a chilling innovation to Roman politics, using the army against Rome itself. When opposed by the popular assembly, he simply marched 6 legions into the city, something forbidden by sacred law for a millennium. The sight of armed soldiers in the Forum hunting down political opponents shocked Romans to their core. But Sulla's real revolution was bureaucratic. His proscription lists publicly posted names of enemies whose property was forfeit and whose murder would be rewarded, turned political murder into a profitable business. Yet even Sulla's dictatorship couldn't stop the rise of new men who saw military command as a path to power. Gnaeus Pompey earned the nickname Teenage Butcher for his ruthless efficiency in Sulla's civil wars, then built a private army by recruiting his father's old veterans. By age 24, he commanded multiple legions that belonged to him personally, not to Rome. The Senate, desperate to maintain control over military power, found itself forced to grant him extraordinary commands just to keep him loyal. Meanwhile, a young Julius Caesar was learning different lessons in the East. Captured by pirates while traveling to Rhodes, he joked that he would return and crucify them, then did exactly that after raising a private fleet. His time in the Greek East taught him the power of personal charisma and public spectacle. While Pompey won battles, Caesar won hearts. He went bankrupt putting on public games, built a gladiatorial school, and cultivated a network of loyal supporters through a combination of charm and strategic generosity. The final act began in 60 BCE with an unlikely alliance. Caesar, Pompey, and the wealthy Crassus formed a private agreement to bypass the Senate entirely. This first triumvirate was technically illegal but proved unstoppable. They divided the empire's richest provinces among themselves and used street gangs to dominate public assemblies. The Senate watched helplessly as Caesar used his consulship to pass laws that were technically legal but shredded centuries of constitutional tradition. But it was in Gaul that Caesar truly revealed his genius. Over 8 years of campaigning, he not only conquered vast territories, but wrote dispatches that were read aloud in Rome's forum, crafting his own legend in real time. His commentaries presented complex military operations with deceptive simplicity, making readers feel like they were participating in his triumphs. While Pompey built theaters and temples in Rome, Caesar was building an army of veterans personally loyal to him, and a public eagerly awaiting his next dispatch from the front. The irony was that both men claimed to be defending the Republic even as they contributed to its destruction. Pompey spoke of constitutional tradition while accepting powers no traditional magistrate ever held. Caesar wrapped his ambitions in populist rhetoric while building an army that answered only to him. The stage was set for a conflict that would destroy the very system both men claimed to protect. The death of the Roman Republic, Caesar's rise and the birth of empire. A single phrase changed history on January 10, 49 BCE. Standing at the Rubicon River, the northern boundary of Italy proper, Julius Caesar looked at the water and uttered, "The die is cast." With those words, he transformed from a provincial governor into a rebel, leading his 13th legion across the forbidden boundary. Among his officers was Mark Antony, who would later swear that at that moment he saw Caesar's face illuminate with a terrible resolve that made even hardened veterans shiver. The response in Rome was chaos. Pompey, despite his boast that he could raise armies by stamping his foot, fled south with the Senate in tow. Caesar's advance was so swift that many cities found their gates opened by Caesar's supporters before they even knew what was happening. His policy of clemency toward defeated enemies, unprecedented in Roman civil wars, created a snowball effect. Each pardoned opponent became a walking advertisement for surrender. The final battle at Pharsalus revealed Caesar's tactical genius. Outnumbered 2-1, he noticed Pompey's cavalry was massed for a decisive charge. He created a fourth line of elite troops armed with spears, ordering them to thrust upward at the cavalry's faces. The psychological effect of threatened disfigurement on Pompey's aristocratic horsemen proved devastating. Their retreat turned into a rout that destroyed Pompey's army and sent him fleeing to Egypt, where betrayal awaited. Caesar's assassination grew not from hatred but from fear of his mercy. His clemency toward enemies convinced many senators that he planned to become a permanent dictator. Only a king could pardon enemies at will. The conspiracy included many men Caesar had pardoned, including Marcus Brutus, whose mother was Caesar's former lover. They chose the Senate meeting of March 15th, 44 BCE, knowing Caesar had dismissed his Spanish bodyguards. believing that surrounded by fellow senators, he needed no protection. The aftermath revealed how thoroughly Caesar had transformed Roman society. When his will was read, revealing that he had adopted young Octavian as his heir and left a substantial gift to every Roman citizen, the mob went wild. They turned his funeral into an unprecedented spectacle, building a spontaneous pyre in the Forum that almost destroyed nearby buildings. Mark Antony's funeral oration, displaying Caesar's blood-stained toga, sparked riots that forced the assassins to flee Rome. But it was the teenage Octavian who proved Caesar's true heir in cunning. Arriving in Rome, he immediately paid Caesar's bequests to the citizens from his own funds, winning instant popularity. When Antony refused to hand over Caesar's fortune, Octavian simply borrowed against his own name. He recruited Caesar's veterans by emphasizing his adoption, using their old loyalty to his father to build an army. Before anyone realized what was happening, a boy dismissed as naive had become a power broker. The Second Triumvirate formalized the Republic's death even as it claimed to restore order. Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus divided the empire between them and launched a systematic purge that dwarfed Sulla's prescriptions. Even Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, could not escape. His head and hands were displayed in the Forum, where he had once delivered his famous speeches. The message was clear. The age of oratory was over, replaced by the reality of pure power. Yet even this alliance could not last. The Roman world was too small for multiple rulers, especially when one proved as politically gifted as Octavian. While Antony sought glory in the east, Octavian methodically consolidated power in the west, building a network of patronage and loyalty that would last decades. He understood something profound. Romans would accept autocracy if it came wrapped in republican traditions and promised stability after a century of chaos. Augustus and the birth of the Pax Romana. On a January morning in 27 BCE, Octavian performed what appeared to be political theater. Before the assembled Senate, he dramatically renounced all his extraordinary powers. As senators rushed to beg him to reconsider, none noticed the calculated nature of this spontaneous display. In that moment, Octavian, soon to be renamed Augustus, had discovered the secret that would sustain Roman imperial power for centuries. Absolute authority could be wielded most effectively by pretending not to wield it at all. His genius lay in understanding that Romans would accept a monarch who didn't look like one. He refused the title of dictator, lived in a relatively modest house, and walked the streets without guards. Yet his suggestions carried the weight of commands, and his unofficial approval became necessary for any significant political advancement. He created what historians would later call a velvet glove system, an iron fist of absolute power wrapped in the reassuring traditions of the Republic. The transformation of Rome under his rule was staggering. He famously boasted, "I found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble," but the reality was more profound. His urban renewal program included Rome's first professional fire brigade, a police force, and a sophisticated water management system. He established a postal service that could deliver messages from Rome to Egypt in just 5 days. The Mediterranean became so safe from pirates that merchants called it Mare Nostrum, our sea. Augustus's greatest innovation was the creation of a permanent professional civil service. He established the Praetorian Guard, fire cohorts, and grain distribution service as career paths for ambitious commoners. His reforms created something unprecedented, a government bureaucracy that could function efficiently regardless of who held power. The census, tax collection, and provincial administration became standardized across the empire. Yet his cultural program proved even more revolutionary. Augustus understood that lasting power required control of Roman imaginations as well as institutions. He commissioned Virgil's Aeneid to give Rome an epic origin story to rival Homer's works. Horace and Ovid crafted poetry that celebrated Roman virtues while entertaining the masses. The result was a golden age of Latin literature that would influence Western culture for millennia. The architectural transformation of Rome reflected this new ideology. Augustus built temples on an unprecedented scale, but their decorations subtly mixed traditional Roman religious imagery with hints of his own divine status. The Ara Pacis, with its frieze showing his family participating in a religious procession, suggested that the stability of Rome itself depended on his bloodline. Even the placement of his massive mausoleum, visible from across the city, reminded Romans that he planned to watch over them even after death. His most brilliant strategy was the reformation of Roman marriage laws. Claiming to restore traditional morality, he created a complex system of rewards for marriage and childbearing, while punishing celibacy and childlessness among the upper classes. The real purpose was control. By involving the state in private life, he ensured that even the most intimate decisions of noble families required considering his wishes. The Pax Romana that resulted was not just an absence of war, but an entirely new way of life. Trade flourished on a scale never seen before. A merchant could travel from Britain to Syria using a single currency, protected by a unified legal code. Ideas and innovation spread rapidly across the empire. A potter in Gaul could copy designs from Egypt, while a philosopher in Spain could debate with colleagues in Greece. Augustus's final masterpiece was arranging his own succession. By adopting his stepson Tiberius and having him share power in his final years, he created a model for imperial transition that avoided civil war. The system he created would survive good emperors and bad ones, maintaining stability even when individual rulers proved incompetent. Rome had become something new in human history, a bureaucratic empire that could sustain itself across generations. The Golden Age of the Good Emperors. On a crisp autumn morning in 98 CE, a messenger raced through the streets of Cologne bearing unprecedented news. For the first time, a Roman emperor had been chosen not by birth or military coup, but by careful selection. The dying Nerva had adopted Trajan, a proven general and administrator, as his successor. This inaugurated an era of 5 rulers whose competence and character would create a golden age that later generations would view with nostalgia and wonder. Trajan transformed the role of emperor through sheer audacity. Breaking with Augustus's advice to limit expansion, he led the army in person, sleeping in the same conditions as his troops. His conquest of Dacia captured so much gold that he funded a 20-year building spree, including a new port at Ostia that could feed the capital even in winter. His forum in Rome featured innovations like the world's first shopping mall, a 6-story complex of 150 shops and apartments that would not be equaled in scale until the 19th century. His successor Hadrian revealed a different kind of imperial genius. Abandoning Trajan's expansionism, he focused on consolidation and culture. He traveled constantly, spending more than half his reign visiting the provinces. In Britain, he personally designed a wall that would mark Rome's northern frontier for centuries. In Athens, he completed the massive temple of Olympian Zeus that had stood unfinished for 638 years. His villa at Tivoli became a living museum of architecture, recreating famous buildings from across the empire. Antoninus Pius proved that peace could be more profitable than war. During his 23-year reign, he never left Italy, yet managed the empire so efficiently that he left a massive surplus in the treasury. His secret was systematic organization. He created the empire's first truly professional civil service, standardized legal procedures across provinces, and extended Roman citizenship more widely than ever before. Under his rule, a merchant could travel from Britain to Egypt, protected by the same laws and using the same currency. But it was under Marcus Aurelius that the Roman Empire faced its greatest test. A devastating plague, possibly smallpox, killed millions and disrupted trade networks across the empire. Germanic tribes, pressed by migrations from the east, launched the first major invasions in centuries. Marcus responded with characteristic thoroughness, selling imperial palace treasures to fund the army and personally leading campaigns on the Danube frontier. At night in his tent, he wrote philosophical meditations that would influence thinkers for millennia. Yet the true achievement of the good emperors lay in their administration. They created a system of imperial governance that could function effectively even in their absence. The Emperor Pius demonstrated this by rarely leaving Rome. The empire practically ran itself through a network of carefully selected governors, standardized procedures, and professional civil servants. They established the principle that even emperors were bound by law, regularly appearing in court as ordinary citizens when their private property was involved in lawsuits. Their building projects revealed a new conception of imperial power. Unlike earlier monuments that celebrated military victories, they focused on public utility. Trajan's markets, Hadrian's wall, the Antonine baths. These were structures that improved daily life for ordinary citizens. They understood that empire required not just military might, but the active consent and participation of the governed. This period marked the peak of ancient globalization. A Syrian merchant could sell silk from China to customers in London. A Greek philosopher could teach students from Gaul, while a Spanish-born senator could govern Asia Minor. Cultural exchange flourished on an unprecedented scale. Mystery cults from Egypt gained followers in Germany, while Roman architecture influenced builders in India. For the first time in history, a significant portion of humanity lived under a single political system that actively encouraged cultural and economic exchange. The good emperors created something unprecedented, an empire that ruled through law rather than force, where merit could trump birth, and where citizenship was seen as a status to be earned rather than an accident of birth. Their achievement would haunt the imagination of later rulers from Charlemagne to Napoleon, who dreamed of recreating their successful blend of power and civilization. Crisis and transformation. The fall and reinvention of the Roman Empire. The auctioneer's voice echoed across the forum in 193 CE. For sale, the Roman Empire! The Praetorian Guard had just murdered the Emperor Pertinax and now offered the throne to the highest bidder. The winner, Didius Julianus, paid 25,000 sesterces to each guardsman, only to be executed by the Senate 2 months later when powerful armies from the provinces marched on Rome. The year of the 5 emperors had begun, unleashing a century of chaos that would transform the Roman world. Plague struck first. The Antonine pandemic, returning in waves, killed millions and shattered ancient trade networks. Cities emptied as survivors fled to the countryside. The population of Rome itself fell by half. Gold currency disappeared from circulation as people hoarded precious metals, forcing the government to debase the denarius. Inflation exploded. A sack of wheat that cost 1 denarius in 150 CE required 50,000 denarii by 250 CE. From the east came a new type of enemy. The Sassanid Persian Empire, unlike the tribal confederations Rome usually faced, fielded professional armies equipped with heavily armored cavalry. In 260 CE, they achieved the unthinkable, capturing a Roman emperor alive. Valerian spent his remaining years as a human footstool for the Persian king Shapur I, who had the emperor's skin tanned and displayed after his death, a shocking demonstration that Rome was no longer invincible. The empire fractured. Britain and Gaul broke away under the Gallic Empire. Egypt and Syria formed the Palmyrene Empire under Queen Zenobia, who claimed descent from Cleopatra. Germanic tribes pushed across the Rhine and Danube. The city of Rome itself built new walls for the first time in centuries. The classical world seemed to be ending. Salvation came from an unlikely source, a series of barracks emperors born to peasant families in the Balkans. Aurelian, called restorer of the world, reunified the empire through brilliant generalship and political compromise. He built Rome's famous wall, but also created the cult of the unconquered sun, a new state religion that could unite pagans and Christians. His reforms showed that Rome could adapt to survive. But it was Diocletian who truly revolutionized the empire. A former slave's son who rose through military merit, he transformed imperial administration. He divided the empire into 4 administrative zones, each with its own capital and ruler. Rome itself was deliberately marginalized. Power now lay closer to the frontiers where armies were needed. He created a mobile field army that could respond quickly to threats while frontier troops handled local defense. His most radical innovation was making the imperial office itself more Persian than Roman. Gone was the Augustus's fiction of being first citizen. Diocletian wore a diadem and royal purple, required prostration before his person, and styled himself Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. The change reflected reality. In a multicultural empire stretching from Britain to Syria, Oriental concepts of kingship made more sense than Roman republican traditions. The price of survival was transformation. The classical city-state culture that defined the early empire gave way to a more regimented society. Diocletian's reforms required sons to follow their fathers' professions and bound peasants to their lands. The old senatorial aristocracy was replaced by a new bureaucratic nobility. Classical temples were abandoned as Christianity spread among both elites and masses, offering certainty in uncertain times. Yet this very transformation ensured Rome's survival in new forms. As the western provinces crumbled under barbarian pressure, the Eastern Empire, soon to be called Byzantine, would preserve Roman law, administration, and culture for another 1,000 years. Diocletian had created something new, a bureaucratic, militarized state that could survive the loss of territories while maintaining its essential character. The transformation and legacy of the Roman Empire. On May 11th, 330 CE, Constantinople was born in a spectacle of power that marked a profound shift in world history. Constantine had transformed an ancient Greek colony into a new Rome that would outlast its parent by a millennium. The dedication ceremony featured both Christian bishops blessing the city and pagan priests reading omens, a perfect symbol of a world in transition. The Roman Empire wasn't dying, it was metamorphosing into something entirely new. The empire's transformation accelerated after a catastrophic defeat at Adrianople in 378 CE. Roman heavy infantry, for centuries the backbone of imperial power, proved fatally vulnerable to Gothic heavy cavalry. The response revolutionized warfare. Rome adopted the weapons and tactics of its enemies. The classical legionary, with his heavy javelin and short sword, gave way to mounted archers and armored horsemen. The army that defended Rome in its final century would have been unrecognizable to Caesar. Climate change delivered the next blow. A cooling period known as the Late Antique Little Ice Age triggered massive population movements across Central Asia. The Huns, pushed westward by failing grasslands, set off a chain reaction that sent Germanic peoples fleeing into Roman territory. But these weren't simple invasions. Many barbarian leaders had served in Roman armies and sought to preserve Roman civilization, not destroy it. Alaric, who famously sacked Rome in 410 CE, had once commanded Roman forces and demanded Roman titles and land for his people. The final Western emperors revealed both the resilience and fatal weaknesses of the Roman system. Child Emperor Valentinian III relied on his brilliant general Aetius, called the Last of the Romans, to hold the empire together through a complex web of alliances and military force. When Valentinian personally assassinated Aetius in 454 CE, he destroyed his own power base. A senator asked him if he realized he just cut off his right hand with his left. He was murdered himself within months. The last great Roman triumph came in 451 CE at the Catalonian Plains. Aetius had assembled a multicultural force of Romans, Visigoths, Franks, and others to face Attila's Hunnic army. The battle featured perhaps the last use of classic Roman infantry tactics alongside Gothic cavalry and Frankish warriors. It was a victory for Roman diplomacy as much as arms, the ability to unite different peoples against a common threat. By 460 CE, real power in the West had shifted to military commanders of barbarian origin who preferred to rule through puppet emperors. Ricimer, a half-Sueve, half-Visigoth general, made and unmade 4 emperors while maintaining the fiction of Roman authority. The system had become so ingrained that even Germanic kings preferred to rule with Roman titles and bureaucracy, rather than create entirely new structures. The end came not with a dramatic fall, but a quiet transition. In 476 CE, the Germanic general Odoacer deposed the teenage emperor Romulus Augustus, but changed little in the actual administration of Italy. He sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, declaring that one emperor was enough. The Eastern emperor simply appointed him as patrician administrator of Italy, a legal fiction that satisfied everyone's need for continuity. Yet Rome's greatest triumph was its cultural survival. The Germanic kingdoms that emerged from the empire's western provinces preserved Roman law, administration, and culture. The Church maintained Latin literacy and Roman organizational methods. The Eastern Empire, now purely Greek-speaking, preserved Roman law in the Justinian Code that would influence legal systems into modern times. What ended in 476 CE was not Roman civilization, but merely one political expression of it. The real Roman Empire never fell, it transformed. Its legacy lived on in the Greek-speaking Byzantine Empire until 1453, in the Holy Roman Empire of medieval Europe, in the Russian Tsars, who claimed to be Caesars, and in countless institutions from the Catholic Church to modern legal codes. Rome's greatest achievement was not its conquest of the Mediterranean world, but its creation of a civilization so adaptable that it could survive the loss of its original homeland. The eternal legacy of Rome. Walk through London's financial district today, and you'll pass an ancient Roman wall supporting a modern skyscraper. This juxtaposition perfectly captures Rome's enduring presence, not as a dead civilization, but as a living foundation of our modern world. The Romans created something unprecedented, a template for civilization so robust that it could survive the loss of its creators. Modern democracy owes more to Rome than Athens. While the Greeks invented democracy, the Romans solved the problem of scale, how to run a representative government too large for direct participation. The American Senate takes its name from Rome and Washington D.C. quote. Architects deliberately echoed Roman designs because they understood that architecture can embody political ideals. When America's founders sought to create a new republic, they studied Rome's successes and failures as a practical guide. The Catholic Church preserved not just Roman culture, but Roman organizational genius. Its dioceses follow ancient Roman administrative boundaries, its bishops inherited the legal authority of Roman governors, and its very title Pontifex Maximus was once held by Julius Caesar. When medieval monks copied ancient manuscripts, they weren't just preserving literature. They were maintaining a continuous chain of knowledge that would fuel the Renaissance. Banks, corporations, and modern business law trace their DNA to Roman innovations. The concept of a corporation as a legal entity distinct from its members comes directly from Roman law. The first joint stock companies were modeled on Roman Societas Publicanorum. Even the word capital derives from the Latin capita, heads, originally referring to heads of cattle as a measure of wealth. Modern Europe's borders still reflect Roman influence. The Rhine-Danube frontier became a lasting cultural boundary. Romance languages predominate to the south and west, Germanic languages to the north and east. Cities from London, Londinium to Cologne, Colonia, grew from Roman foundations. The very concept of Europe as a cultural unity emerged from the shared experience of Roman rule. Rome's greatest legacy may be intellectual rather than physical. The idea that law should be rational, universal, and based on citizenship rather than tribal membership was revolutionary. Roman law's influence extends far beyond former imperial territories. Japan's 19th century legal code was partially based on Roman civil law via the German legal system. The empire lives on in unexpected ways. The Vatican's Swiss Guard wears uniforms inspired by Roman military dress. The Russian word for king, Tsar, derives from Caesar. Modern military ranks like colonel, from colonus, commander of a column, and general, from generalis, leader of the whole, are Latin in origin. The Olympics revive Roman spectacle as much as Greek athletics. The torch relay was invented for Hitler's 1936 games based on Roman rather than Greek practices. Yet perhaps Rome's most important lesson is about adaptation and survival. The Romans succeeded not because they were militarily invincible, they lost many battles, but because they could learn from defeat. They adopted foreign customs, technologies, and even gods while maintaining their core identity. They showed that a civilization can absorb massive changes and foreign influences while retaining its essential character. Today, Rome's physical empire is tourist attractions and ruins, but its invisible empire of influence shapes everything from our laws to our languages, our architecture to our expectations of government. We live in a world Rome made. The real question isn't whether Rome fell, but whether it ever really ended at all